All right. Good evening. I will now call this meeting to order. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to adopt the final agenda?
I make a motion to adopt the final agenda as submitted.
Second?
Is there a second? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Thank you. The motion carries. Our next order of business is to adopt the minutes from our July 16th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Yes. So a motion is made by Commissioner Otterstetter and seconded by Commissioner Racius. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, this motion carries. We are now moving on to our discussion items. So tonight, our first item for discussion and action is item 3.1. Consider an amendment to the Hunters Brook Creekside PUD. I will now turn it over to City Planner Brian McCann for a staff presentation, and then I will open it up for public hearing for those in the chambers this evening who wish to speak on this request. Turn it over.
Thank you, Acting Chair and Commissioners. Yes, tonight we have a proposal from the Hunters Brook Creekside Development. Tradition Development is the applicant for this. As you are well aware of at this point, they've gone through the revised preliminary plat process in October of last year. They received their final plat and PUD approvals for the Creekside development, specifically as part of the third edition back in May. And then they most recently received their final plat approvals for the fourth and final edition this past June. So, like I mentioned, as you're aware, they have 13 executive lots in the Creekside development. At the time of their revised preliminary plat, they showed proposed architecture with carriage houses within the front setback. They are requesting a modification to the approved PUD to reduce the setback for accessory structures from 45 feet to 25 feet. So here's the image that was presented at preliminary plat. You can see the front of the main home and then the proposed structures that would need that PUD adjustment for a closer front setback. To give you a visual representation of what that 25-foot setback would look like, everything within the red is 25 feet from the property lines for this development. So still sufficient room for an accessory structure to be in front of the home as they showed in that last image and still meet the setback requirements. Now, the front setback for the principal dwelling in Creekside is also 25 feet, so it matches what is necessary for the homes, but they would still like to put them closer to the homes or closer to the street than the homes. So that was for the third edition. Here's what 25 feet looks like from the fourth edition. So once again, everything outside of the red meeting necessary setbacks, obviously, except for that front setback would be allowed. So here is a copy of the approved PUD regulations for Hunters Brook Creekside. And then you can see the new addition for accessory structure front setback. The R1 standard is 45 feet. And as I mentioned, they're proposing to go down to 25 feet. So staff recommend holding a public hearing on the request and providing a recommendation for the city council on the amendment. This does require a public hearing. We haven't received any comments on the request, and we properly noticed it in the Waconia Sun Patriot, as well as sending notices out to individual property owners within 350 feet of the development boundaries. So with that, I have some sample motions for you on the screen this evening. Staff can stand for any questions, and the applicant is in the audience tonight.
All right. Thank you. Does the applicant wish to speak tonight?
Good evening, Commissioners. Pat Rossi with Tradition Development. And I appreciate the opportunity to have this request heard tonight. As was mentioned in the staff report, these are executive style homes, will be some nice high-end homes. And in the third edition in particular, our builder there is going to be Gagne Homes, and they supplied this rendition that Brian has up on the screen for us. I guess it came to our attention as the builder was starting the process of micro-siting potential amenities on the lots that may be included within their initial model builds, that the need for a carriage house and buyers that would like to have that type of a structure on the property became noted, and probably a likely request on the part of the buyers. So discussing with Brian and staff here a couple of weeks ago, we found out that our limitation was 45 feet, and I believe that's the standard PUD language. So just want to have that opportunity. We're not certain that there will be a carriage house on every lot, but certainly is a good possibility. And to be able to put those carriage houses on the front side of the house with the architecture fully matching the existing house, I think just gives us the best option here, instead of trying to push it back again into the areas where we're trying hard to preserve those trees. So the areas like on this rendition where the carriage house is shown, they're for the most part in areas that have already been cleared out with the site grading. So that's really all I have, just a potential amenity, and gives our home builder that option with their clients.
Okay. So there's nothing more. I will thank you, and I will open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the chamber this evening who wishes to comment on this item? And seeing that there are no individuals here in the audience, commissioners, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Person? And a second? And so motion made by Commissioner Iverson and second by Commissioner Croth. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So thank you. The motion carries and the public hearing is closed. I will now open the floor for the Planning Commission to discuss. Commissioners, are there any questions or comments?
I have a quick question. Can you tell me the difference between a carriage house and a garage? Does one have living space up above it versus another that would not? Or is this just semantics?
No, I mean, primarily, commissioners, it's a garage with typically some, I won't say living space, but usable space up above, a game room, rec room, maybe storage space for their outdoor patio furniture, things like that, just some extra space for the homeowners. But essentially, these will be built as a garage, not as a separate living structure without garage doors.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There may be a second question, just as we're looking at that on the second floor. Are there connections on the second floor to the main home? Just curiosity.
I suppose that there could be, but I haven't seen any plan details from the builder that show that to occur.
Yeah.
So this is an amenity. What would a house without the carriage house look like? It would be a garage that's just on the side, or?
Yeah, on this particular house, I can't see what's behind the carriage house, but there very, very well may be an attached two-car garage to the house in addition.
On top of it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then just trying to jump on top of this, with the size of some of the lots, it looked like we might have some side yard setback issues if this is offset slightly. are these all going to be carriage houses that are literally directly in front of the house?
I can't say that they would all be directly in front of the house. The builder has indicated that's usually the preference, that, say, coming up the driveway towards the main house off to the side of the home would be located the carriage house, an additional garage space, and some parking out front of those
I mean, I
garage
just look at like 3 and 2. If 3 and 2 decide to go this route, is it going to be a violation of the side yard setback?
Well, if I may, the maximum structure allowed, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, is only 900 square feet. So it would be I'm not every carriage house would have the same footprint, but the easy math on that, it'd be a 30 by 30 foot structure is 900 square feet max. So we would work with the builder to locate the carriage houses so that they wouldn't violate the side yard setback, which, Brian, is that 7.5 feet on the side yard or 15?
For the primary dwelling,
For the
it's
primary?
10 feet for accessory structures.
Okay. I don't believe that the side yard would be an issue.
And I think to your point, there's going to be a few of these where, like, I look at like 6, and like that's going to be tough to hit that front one too. So I think you even mentioned this. There's going to be some lots where you're just not going to be able to pull it off.
Yeah, some of them it won't work, and then some of them may be well beyond the 25 feet as well, with some of those driveways that head back deeper into the lot. Lot 3, for instance, it looks like there will be plenty of room on the front side of Lot 3, without getting anywhere near the 25.
I guess maybe this is a question for Brian then. Like, how does that get regulated? Is that like they have to submit that back to the city? Is it more just like, I'm curious?
Sure. Yeah, commissioners. So each of these homes will come with a building permit where we will evaluate it separately. I will note that these are just speculative locations. When it comes to the actual building permit, that's where we'll evaluate the location. So this house on 2 could get pushed back, which would allow for a second or an accessory structure there.
That makes sense.
What is the price range or the anticipated price range?
Well, I believe that probably the bottom side of the range would start in the neighborhood of 1.2 to 1.5 and upwards quite a bit from there.
So it would very definitely be an individual request by the buyer that would say, here's what I want.
Right.
And I want it in a carriage house configuration.
That's right. The anticipation here is that the buyers that buy in this price range, it's a likely request on the part of those buyers.
And is it typical that they're maybe buying the lot first with certain ideas in mind, or are there going to be sketch ideas presented?
I believe that what will happen here with these lots, they're showing as a padded, corrected lot, and where the rectangle surrounding, say, lot 3 or 2, that pad area has been corrected with compacted, suitable fill. But I believe that nearly every one of the buyers out here will make a site visit with the home builder and review that pad location along with their desires for a specific home and the location on that lot and the carriage house.
Makes sense.
So there's, and ultimately there's checks and balances as to how this configuration will look on the lot. So that's key at the same time, and the fact that it's in a price range that would require a little bit more discrimination, quite frankly.
That's right, commissioners, and that'll start with Tradition Development and the builder. They'll be out on the site with their buyers and they'll prepare the plans and the site survey. In the case of all of our developments, we review every site survey for the individual homes before they're submitted to the city building department for review. So we're helping to ensure that initial submittal is compliant with the various requirements for the zoning on these lots.
This seems to me a reasonable request, and I have no problem with it as such. My only question is the same I have for variance applications, which is really for Brian. What is the precedential effect of an exception like this? Does it mean that we need to grant other similar requests, or we take these one off based on their individual merits?
Yes, so with a PUD, there is precedence setting for something like that. It's not like a variance, which are evaluated on individual bases, but I mean, this is a different type of lot than a typical residential development that we see in the city. These are much larger lots that could accommodate this type of use. So I would say this specific instance is more qualifying than maybe some other residential developments we've seen lately.
So we're not signing up automatically to reduce the setback by 20 feet in every other instance?
Correct.
I have two small questions left for you. What are the potential downfalls of having a front yard setback that are 25 feet instead of 45, just from a city situation? Is it any more difficult for plowing? Is it any more difficult for anything else? I don't even.
Sure.
Question for you.
From a city standard, no, because we have 10-foot easements in the front anyway, so they can't do anything within that 10 feet typically. And then anything outside of that, we don't really regulate. I mean, it's outside of our easement area, so there's no problems with snow plowing or utilities or stormwater or anything like that. And the fact that it's meeting the approved front setback for the dwelling as well, that's pretty common for developments to allow an accessory structure to not be any closer to the road than the home. So that would also match in this instance as well.
I know this neighborhood's kind of independent, but the 25-yard front yard setback still kind of fits in with the Victoria style versus 45 feet. Am I reading that correctly?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So going back to the PUD, because that would be precedent setting, had there been consideration of having these as variances, or would that have required each individual lot to go through a unique?
Correct. Yeah. So we would have to evaluate the uniqueness criteria for each individual lot. And I mean, that's tedious. If you guys want to do 13 different public hearings down the road, you're more than welcome to. But
It was a,
the PUD is the appropriate process to approve this request.
yeah, that's why I was asking that question, because it lends to an answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Or would someone want to propose a motion?
I'd move to recommend the city council adopt the ordinance and summary publication amending the PUD for Hunters Brook Creekside.
Okay.
Second.
And so motion was made by Commissioner Pedersen and seconded by Commissioner Racius. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. The motion carries. Our second and final item for discussion tonight is item 3.2, an ordinance amendment discussion for fences, signs, and commercial zoning districts. I will now turn this over to City Planner Brian McCann and Associate Planner Travis Brierly for staff presentation.
Thank you, Commissioners. Yes, tonight is going to be a little bit of a lengthy discussion. We've been working very hard on putting some draft ordinances together and also coming up with some commercial district standards for you all to review. So starting off with a little bit of background, we are potentially exploring a zoning code overhaul for this winter. So that's something that you may see in the future, different sections coming back to you, which need to be evaluated to be brought up to code within the last 30 years of changes for certain sections. 3 of those items that need immediate attention are the ones we will be discussing tonight. So our fences, our signs, and our commercial districts, which we actually recently just repealed. City Council did hold a workshop in April regarding the South Growth commercial area and what types of uses and design they would like to see out there. So this is the first process of getting City Council's review to help formulate their vision as well. So for fences, we have some standards proposed for all fences, which that they have to be maintained to be safe, clean, and orderly. They have to consist of workmanlike quality with only a single color and the framing of the fence inward to the property. We also have standards for prohibited fences and enforcement and appeals for any fences that are found to be in violation of the section. Also incorporating a sightline triangle to provide intersection clearance. We did have an exhibit that was not in the case for tonight's discussion, but was included with your packets this evening to help give you a visual understanding of what that sightline triangle means. Travis came up with it, so if you guys have any specific questions about that, he can absolutely help with that. We also are incorporating standards for fences next to sidewalks or trails, so setback requirements, as well as to stormwater mains and sanitary sewer or water mains. The current code reads it's up to staff discretion. We've had some difficulty enforcing that in some of our recent developments, so we came up with these standards with our public works team to make sure that we are properly maintaining our infrastructure and have a setback that's easy to understand for property owners. And then for residential specifically, we have height and permit requirements incorporated. So pretty standard. Front yard has to be 4 feet or less. And then for side and rear yards, 7 feet or less with the zoning permit. They can go between 7 to 8 feet with a building permit. And then for commercial fences, up to 8 feet in height for screening of outdoor storage with a building permit. And that must also be compatible with the principal building. And then we will require commercial fences adjacent to residential uses with a 15-foot setback from streets and driveways as well. So that was all for our fence proposed ordinance. Now moving on to the commercial districts, we don't have a true ordinance prepared yet. These are a list of uses that staff came up with that we could potentially see in a commercial district. So as you see on the right of the screen here, we have P for permitted uses, C for conditional. I is interim, which I know is a new concept for you all, and we will talk about what an interim use permit is as well. And then N for not permitted. And I will note that anything that's listed here, if it's not specifically listed, it will not be an allowed use in the district. We'll have a catch-all to say if we didn't specifically address it, it's not allowed. So here's a list of the uses. It was included in your packet, so it should be familiar with all of you. And if you have any specific concerns, we can talk about that, or you can reach out to staff individually if you would like to redline the list or have any concerns about specific uses being shown. I also provided them in your packets for this evening if you want to go through those this evening. And then moving on to accessory uses. So for a primary use, those were the last few that we looked at. Now regarding accessory uses, these are accessory to a principal use. That's why they're called an accessory use. Same standards with the P, C, I, and N. So have to review those to determine if these would be appropriate in our commercial districts. I should have noted in the last slide as well, but we have our central business district, which is our downtown where we are right now. We're proposing 2 different commercial districts, C1 being a neighborhood district. These are uses that would fit in well next to a neighborhood, next to a residential development. And then a community, this would be a community-wide use. This is where people would come from all over the city of Victoria to come and use these uses. And then our I-1 light industrial, we only have a few of these properties in town, but these are your more intense industrial uses. And then here we have a bulk standards table. So we're proposing different standards for our C1 and C2, as well as new standards for our I-1 light industrial. I've noted that the CBD does not have any minimum setbacks or size limitations. That's done on purpose so that we can try to reduce the size of a lot and put the building towards the sidewalk so it's easily accessible and creates a walkable downtown district. So we aren't proposing any new standards for those, but we do have new proposed standards for our commercial and industrial districts. Moving on to interim use permits. These are permits that are specifically allowed for a period of time for a use that reasonably utilizes the property. So if we have a use listed in one of the tables with an I, it means it would only be allowed for a period of time as designated by the Planning Commission and City Council. You would review it with a public hearing similar to any other conditional use permit. The only difference is we can put an end date on the use. So by that time, they either have to request and get an extension approved or the use has to cease on the property. And then additionally, with the packet this evening, we have created definitions for every single use that was listed. It's a lengthy but necessary document to make sure that if anyone approaches the city with a specific type of use, that we're putting them in the correct category and processing their applications correctly. With that, I will turn it over to Travis, who will talk about signs.
Evening, Planning Commission. So with signs, just to warn you, there's a lot to it. It is fairly regulatory because there's a good variety of signs in the world. But our goals for the signs going through it is to provide clear language and definitions for the overall regulations of the sign. With that in mind, we want fair non-content controlled regulations. We want to dictate what a sign looks like, or at least provide the limitations to what can be done, not necessarily what it can say. The other thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that it's fair between residential districts and non-residential districts, including the CBD, which would be, CBD, the light industrial, the C1 and the C2, which will be coming forward and proposed. The other thing that we want to do is get rid of the clutter. We did go around and take a look at a lot of the signs under our current regulations, and there's a way that we can still allow businesses to have that, but reducing the clutter for it and get a better, cleaner appearance for the community. The other thing that we want to do is we want to make sure we reduce any hazards that are produced by signs that are being put up. A lot of that goes into the sightline triangle, which is basically when you pull up to an intersection, being able to clearly see vehicles coming across so that you could safely access those type of streets, and that works for pedestrians as well.
So here's just a slide which can help formulate some discussion and feedback for staff based on the ordinances that were in your packet and presented to you this evening. So if you have any specific questions for staff, now's the time. We're happy to answer them, and thanks for considering them.
I have a specific.
Oh, thank you, commissioners. Any questions or comments?
I have a specific one just because it's a former life of mine. I noticed your, I think it's accessory swimming pools. They're conditional, not permitted. Can you expand on the difference between conditional versus permitted? I would think a swimming pool you'd want permitted, especially if it's a public pool.
Sure. So keep in mind, these are commercial districts. They're not our residential districts. So the types of residential projects that you would see here are multifamily projects where maybe they have a rooftop pool or a pool in their parking lot. So if they're proposing that as an amenity for the property, we would like to see that go through a conditional use permit process to make sure that it's being used accordingly and that the apartment building is still the primary use.
Gotcha. So it's still technically permitted. It's just a conditional permit versus. Got it. Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Yep.
I have one general question, Brian and Steph. What was the process for coming up with these new ordinances? Was there any benchmarking? Did you go out and find best practices? How did you go about this?
Yeah, I'll start from the beginning, I guess. Last year, when I came on to city staff, I noticed that our commercial districts were somewhat lacking. Just to say, our setbacks for our C1 district actually directed us to our swimming pool setbacks. So that was just one of the main issues that we noticed that probably wasn't going to work very well when a commercial application actually came in for development. So, and a lot of the uses are similar to what are in our central business district right now. We want our commercial district not to compete with our downtown businesses, but we want to allow new uses that have developed over the last 30 years since the ordinance has been updated. So after that repeal that was done last year, Jen, Travis, and I sat down. We looked at all of our market cities in the area, so looking at other Carver County cities as well as cities where we have past experience and looking at what types of uses have been allowed there, and seeing if those uses would work in Victoria, if that's something that we could see here. So we spent, I think, probably 3 whole days sitting down looking at districts for other cities and really thinking about these uses and if they should be conditional or permitted and how this could work throughout the entire city.
And the same is true for the sign ordinance and the fence ordinance, I presume?
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Going back to signs, are certain signs going to be grandfathered in? Or I can just see that all of a sudden we find some signs that we don't like, and it could be a substantial cost to the business owner to change it for our standards. That's sort of my question.
Commissioner, that's a good question. Any sign that's permitted currently under our code or was permitted by the code at the time of installation, if any changes that are made make that sign illegal, what happens is it goes into a legal non-conforming status where that sign will still be allowed to exist. It'll still be allowed to be maintained and kept in a good condition. There's no requirement underneath any of the zoning ordinances that would change that would force that sign to be removed.
Okay, thank you.
I assume that goes same with fences in the districts too, like similar logic, not the exact same, but similar logic.
Correct. There's specific instances where the city could have something taken down. Those incidents would be if there is a significant hazard created, and that would be at the discretion of our public works or law enforcement, fire department, and such agencies.
And so if I understood that, they're allowed to maintain it, fix it. If they wanted to upgrade it, replace it, they'd have to bring it up to code.
Correct. If say it's a fence and it gets voluntarily removed, it would have to meet the current standard at the time of reinstallation. However, if there's an accident or there's damage from weather, something like that, then there's a set time frame to replace the fence or the sign in the condition it was to maintain that legal non-conforming status.
In the event that using that time frame, so there was an incident, weather, whatever, does damage to it, and there's a period of time that they're responsible to have that repaired, but they don't, then does it move it into a situation where it would be viewed under the current or new standards?
Correct.
In that situation?
Correct, Chair. If let's say there's a sign up and it gets damaged, whether it's done by Mother Nature or if it's done by something else, and a period of time goes by, which we haven't fully gone into looking at that time period, but once that time period goes by, then that sign loses its legal non-conforming status, goes non-conforming, and the city can take enforcement actions to have it cleaned up And then a new sign could be put in place underneath the code at that time.
Based on the current one, okay. Thank you.
I have a few questions, and I'll try very hard not to be irritating, and I'll keep it at a higher level. But one question I have with respect to both the fence ordinance and the sign ordinance is that the enforcement mechanism is to characterize a violation as a misdemeanor, which, as you know, in Minnesota carries a maximum penalty of a $1,000 fine and 90 days in jail. I guess you'd have to check with the city attorney, but would it not be an option to have a continuing fine, for example, a fine per days of violation, plus a duty to remediate any violation?
Commissioner, that's a great question. What you're describing is considered an administrative citation. And currently within our code, we don't have that mechanism. So if there is a citation issued for a violation, it would be a misdemeanor that does come with a mandatory court date. And then it would be up to the city's prosecuting attorney as well as the judge to how it would be remedied, including any fines or further actions taken.
Okay.
And so, to the point that the codes are going to be overhauled, there would be an opportunity to maybe address your question in another stage of our discussions.
If I can just jump in real quick, Commissioner. So we've had this conversation with council before, and there's just really no appetite to go down that route at the moment. We really feel that having conversations first is where we start, right?
Yeah.
And then see where we can go from there. Yeah. We do have that authority down the road, but we really want to make sure we're staying friendly, transparent, and just really, communicating with that resident and or business owner, just, to make sure that we're keeping peace. And some people just don't know the rules either. So that's why we're kind of trying to shy away from that at the moment. But yeah, we do have that in our back pocket if something were to occur.
I fully support that approach. It makes a lot of sense to have that conversation in advance, but it seems to me a fine is less foreboding than a jail term as a potential threat. And I would encourage us to consider that as an option because, frankly, business people are motivated by not having to pay money, especially when they know that there's really no realistic possibility of jail time.
Yeah. I'll just note that, as Jen mentioned, our first instance is always trying to work with the property owner and get the issue resolved without having to bear any expense on the property owner. If it does go down that road, I will say from my past life in the city of Ramsey, it's a lot more effective to get a property cleaned up when there's a threat of jail versus a fine. Yeah. In Ramsey, we actually kind of strayed away from administrative fines because people would just show up and pay the ticket. Money wasn't an object for them, but the threat of jail time makes them clean up the property a lot faster.
Fair question.
Well, if it's a petty misdemeanor or a misdemeanor and you show up and pay your $50 fine every month, it's a lot cheaper than spending $3,000 to fix the sign.
Correct.
Unless it's $1,000 a day for a continuing violation or something like that.
Yeah, could be that too. So I'm just curious on the signs though. Does this include like banners?
Commissioner, yes. Banners would fall, banners, temporary signs, the sandwich board you see in front of restaurants, anything set up for special events, the signs that have the two metal poles you stick in the ground, all that type of stuff is included and it's regulated. Some things are prohibited, some things are set for specific time periods to how long they can be up. Nothing would be permitted with inside the right-of-way, except for special things, such as if you look at VIX, they have a sandwich board they'll put out with the daily special. As long as it doesn't cause a hazard to traffic or pedestrians, that's something that is written in to say, yes, this is permitted, it helps the business. And then when the business closes, it needs to come inside, so it's not out all night. So there are things like that built in through this as fair as possible. I do want to point out that with many of these sign ordinances I went through, we looked at about 7 different communities, and we looked at what different regulations were there. There were many things that we liked. There's many things that we didn't like. There's many things that we bounced off different departments, and trying to be as comprehensive and as fair as possible through this process.
Political signs is something we all love, right? And we're going to see a lot of them coming up. I noticed that we deal with them We have a term that we defined in the statute or in the ordinance. And it doesn't necessarily track. Non-commercial signs is the Minnesota law with respect to campaign and political signs. That might be something to consider in terms of an amendment. But I noticed that the Minnesota law only covers state general election years. And some municipalities have ordinances regulating political sign use in non-state general election years. I'm wondering, does Victoria have that or want that?
Doesn't 21.3A1 cover that? It says, except signs with temporary display, not blah, 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 includes campaign signs. Does that cover that?
Well, commission campaign signs are regulated by state law.
Okay.
So everything comes through there. For example, there's a specific time to when you can put a campaign sign up prior to an election to how long it can be till after the election for its display. During that time frame, the city cannot enforce any regulations unless it comes to safety or if it's in the public right of way.
So outside of that time, I guess, out to the commissioner's point, is it free for all, or do we need to cover it here?
Outside of that time, it would be regulated as a temporary sign, but because it would be a political sign or something like that, at that point, we would go from identifying the type of sign, and if we restricted saying you can't have certain signs that fit within the code, such as vote for Thomas Jefferson, that at that point, we're actually looking at the content of the sign rather than the type of sign that's being displayed.
At a related point, in section 21.4, we say that billboards can only be placed on city property.
Correct.
Do we not have a First Amendment issue with respect to commercial speech or free speech generally? If somebody wants to pay for a billboard on private property in Victoria, can they not do that?
Commissioner, that is a good question. The billboard itself is not based on content, so therefore there wouldn't be the First Amendment part to it. When billboards are defined with inside the code, you're talking like the one that's out on 5. What that does is that many communities restrict those type of billboards to city property, 1, because of the maintenance of them, and 2, they're also a potential revenue stream for the city in the future. By restricting it to only city property, what we've done is we've allowed the current and future planning commissions and city councils to make a determination whether that's something that they would want or not want going forward.
But if I'm a farmer and I want to sell my piece of land for the placement of a billboard, do I not have that right?
Well, Commissioner, that wouldn't be a billboard at that point. If you're putting up a for sale sign to promote the property, that would fall underneath a temporary real estate sign.
No, what if it's a billboard that says, I don't know, some political message?
That could be, depending on the type of construction, that could be a monument sign. It could also be a pylon or a freestanding sign. So not billboard specifically defined. And let me pull the definition.
I saw the definition. Yeah. So it's commercial.
Yes, it's for, billboards are specifically for the advertisement or the sale of advertisement.
You see a lot of right-to-life billboards, though, for example. Could that be done on private property without offending the ordinance?
Well, generally, those type of billboards are owned by, say, Blue Ox or Clear Channel or whatever other sign companies are out there. They're renting out that space. So therefore, it's a commercial transaction.
Okay, just a question. This is a small point, but in 21.4, we restrict the signs for professional use to only 3 square feet. That seems awfully small, especially to be viewed at a distance. If I'm an accountant, for instance, and I want to put a professional sign out, and I only get 3 square feet, that seems like it might be too small.
Commissioner, can you repeat the specific?
Yeah, section, let me find it for you here. 21.-4, capital D, subpart 14.
Those are professional occupation signs, Commissioner. Those would be things that you would see if you go to the dentist on the front, it says, Dr. whoever DDS, and then it has hours of operation and phone numbers, contact information. That's where a professional occupation sign falls.
Okay. And then one last question. I see that graffiti is defined, but I don't see a regulation of graffiti. Is that covered by maintenance?
Graffiti is not a permitted type of sign.
No, it's defined though, right, in the ordinance?
I believe we,
I thought I saw a definition of it.
Yeah, I see it.
yes, graffiti is
Freestanding.
defined in the ordinance. So,
But we don't try to regulate graffiti? We don't prohibit it as such?
because it's, Commissioner, because it's not a permitted use, it'd be automatically prohibited. Graffiti is a style of artwork, so we do allow for murals to go into place, which some people may see as graffiti. Everybody has a different artistic style or different interpretation what art is. So we want to make sure we keep that distinction between content-based regulation versus the type of regulation it would be. So just making those distinctions by definition.
Okay. Sorry for all the questions.
As I went through the packet, it became apparent that what we're really doing is preventative. We want to prevent as many problems that can potentially come up. And of course, there's an awful lot of creativity out there that can find a way of working around. And, I didn't, I recall there was a church north of the Dairy Queen. You remember that, Christian? That came before the Planning Commission, and it was based on the lumens, I guess it was, of the sign at the same time, and it was the end result was that it was a definition of the amount of color that was coming out of this sign.
Brightness or something.
Brightness, yep.
It's like, had to eliminate, I can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, it was too bright for people driving by or something of that nature. I can't remember the details on it, so.
But, I mean, that is an issue with churches at the same time, I guess, is the one that comes to mind, a number of churches in the area with signs. So defining the parameters for that would be part of the preventative, in my view.
And Commissioner, underneath 21.4A6, we have dynamic displays listed, and it does regulate how bright those can be. It also provides a calculation method as depending on how bright it is and how big it is for how far you go away from it, so that type of stuff can be measured. Any sign or any dynamic display or any lit sign that would be there that would create a nuisance or hazard would be addressed through our nuisance code. So there are other opportunities in the code to resolve issues. But as you had pointed out, Commissioner, this is primarily preventative. It's trying to get ahead of some of creativity that happens around growing businesses, around having smaller town businesses. There's a lot of variety that goes into it. I would like to point out that the sign ordinance is not perfect, and it never will be perfect. There's too many things. There's too many specific examples, but those would be things that if a business owner wanted to come forward and say, hey, I'm looking at doing this, or a resident came forward and say, I'm looking at doing this, can we do it? A lot of it's going to come down to sound judgment and reasonable application of the code.
Okay, I want to go back to kind of like the change management for like our downtown and some of those businesses that do have the sandwich boards or stuff on their windows. I know we said like a lot of stuff gets grandfathered. Like, what is the plan to make sure that like the current business owners have an understanding that things are going to change a little bit? It doesn't sound like it's drastic changes for a lot of them. A lot of the things they're doing today are pretty much okay, but like, is there any sort of like informational meeting or something that's going to help them so that they, know what's okay and what's not? We don't cause like more harm than good.
Yeah. So when we do have an official ordinance prepared for you guys to officially hold a public hearing to review, that would be the time. Now, we don't send out individual notices to property owners for a public hearing for something like this because it has citywide implications, and that means we would have to send 10,000 notices or whatever, and that might cost us a little bit of money. So It's really just business owners paying attention to agendas. We can talk to business owners. Jen has a good relationship with a lot of local business owners, and she can let them know that this is coming and provide them copies of the ordinances in case they have specific questions. But it's really going to come down to that public hearing. That's going to be the real piece of engagement where people will come to you or the city council and voice their concerns on any proposed sign changes we have.
And that communication would be all of those except for the 250-foot kind of proximity-based communication?
Correct. If it relates to a single property. So if,
Then it would be.
Yeah.
Because this is broad in scope, it would be in the Waconia.
yeah, so say we had a sign
Website,
standard
et cetera.
where we said it requires a conditional use permit, that is something where it is very specific to one property, and then we would send the notice. Yeah.
And Commissioner, to your point, if there's a change in ownership and they want to change a sign, if the sign's being updated, it will depend on what they're doing. But even if the sign is in a legal non-conforming status, that status still exists, even throughout an ownership change. Okay. The only way that wouldn't happen would be if it was granted through an interim use permit, and then there's a defining act or time frame that would say that's no longer allowed or you need to reapply. We don't have any of that type of stuff in the sign ordinance, however.
Yeah, no, it just seems like all three of these will affect the businesses here in Victoria. So make sure they get the message.
As a guess, how many legal non-conforming signs do you think there are right now in the business district?
Commissioner, with the changes to this ordinance, how many would that be?
Just based on what this would look like and how many your guesstimate would be of the current situation?
Maybe a dozen. Realistically, there's not a whole lot, but what the sign ordinance would do, or with the updated sign ordinance, it would create it would redefine the uniform standard for signs on businesses, especially with future development and redevelopment. We did look at different businesses which use banners, which are considered a temporary sign for displaying either products that they sell or displaying for different entrants or just a different way to present their business, where they might have a permanent sign that's lit and then they could have a banner somewhere else on the building. So the one thing that we want to do is make sure that that banner that's up there stays in a good condition, and if it doesn't stay in a good condition, that it's removed, so that we can keep a good appearance with the downtown district.
And relevant.
Right. Like you said, the biggest thing with this is just trying to get ahead, but also make sure that we have that standard in place. If we have 50 different signs on 50 different businesses of all shapes, size, colors, protruding different ways off the building, then you get kind of a cluttered look. It'd be like a marquee sign being put up that has a display for like a movie theater and things like that. That would be prohibited because that protrudes out on the street, but that's different than if you did a canopy or awning, which is pulled back, and you can create a more uniform standard down the length of especially a multi-tenant building.
And that it was a very well-defined theme, in my view, as going through the packet. Let's keep it clean is really what our objective is. So I think that's.
Yeah, that matters. So 2 process questions for me. So one, you've looked at others, compared other notes. You think you've captured all of those kind of things out there in this draft. I'm seeing affirmation of that. So in terms of, this isn't going to be a motion that we have any decision on tonight. Is there a timeline for what the next step of bringing it before, the commission, before a public hearing?
Yep. So I think the next step would be to bring it to council to make sure that they are comfortable with the regulations we're proposing as well. And if they're comfortable with that, we would move into the formal public hearing process, which it would come back to you again. We would let you know if there are any revisions based on any changes we might do between now and that time, so that you clearly understand what is new to you and what's being proposed, and then public hearing, recommendation to council, similar as any other ordinance that we've done. And then after that would be implemented into our code, and we would do our work based off of those standards.
So what would be the hopeful timing of implementing it into the code? Are we talking 6 months, a year, 2 weeks?
I would say within the next 4 months for sure, especially as it relates to the commercial development piece. We are receiving applications for commercial developments in our South Growth area, and we need to have some standards in place before we can approve those.
So there's a motivation for clarity.
Correct.
On behalf of the community and economic development.
Yeah, specifically related to the commercial districts, and we have motivating factors as well for the fences. As I mentioned, we've run into some issues with some other developments regarding fences, and then our sign ordinance is also very out of date, and we'd like to have some of these standards in place for our commercial districts as well, so that if we get a multi-tenant type building, that they can have uniform signage similar to like our Main Street building in town. So there are reasons for all the immediate ones that we're bringing to you this evening.
So in the interim, would you encourage emails as we then go back through of comments that we may have to you and Travis?
Correct. Yes, that would be extremely helpful if something comes to your mind in the next few weeks. I'm not quite sure when we're going to bring this draft to council, probably within one of their next few meetings, hopefully. But if you think of anything at that time that we can address before bringing it to the council, that would be great.
We just can't copy each other because that would violate the open meeting law.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah, you can message all three of us, but don't message your peers, please.
Yeah, only 2 copies, yeah.
Oh, remembering the details of the rules.
Yeah, I shouldn't say that.
Looking around. Commissioners, hearing no more discussion, is that correct? Well, this request does not require a formal motion, and that concludes our discussion of this item this evening. So we're moving on to the miscellaneous section of our agenda. Are there any miscellaneous items from staff?
Yes, just so that you're all aware, our next meeting is August 20th. We do have 3 items for that meeting. The first one being our first commercial proposal in our South Growth area. So that was quite the push this evening for getting some of these standards reviewed by you, so we have something to compare it to for the first commercial property down there. We're also going to take a look at our CUP regulations, similar to as we just did this evening. And at one of the requests of one of the commissioners, we thought it would be helpful to devise a development map and provide you some updates on some recent developments so that you have a resource to go back to. So that's all that staff has.
Is there any discussion on those items from us? I think the development map is going to be cool.
Good idea.
Thank you. Commissioners, do any of you have miscellaneous items this evening? No? All right. Commissioners, there are no more items this evening. Can I ask for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And may I get a second? So motion made by Commissioner Iverson and seconded by Commissioner Pedersen. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. We are adjourned.